My brother-in-law's truck was in my parents' driveway. That's the first thing I saw when I turned onto their street, that black truck with a dent on the rear bumper that he'd never bothered to fix. I sat there at the stop sign for a moment longer than I needed to, just looking at it. He wasn't supposed to be here. Nobody was supposed to be here. Today was supposed to be mine. I should back up. My parents have been married for 42 years. 42 years of my dad waking up early to make coffee before my mom got out of bed. 42 years of them splitting one dessert at restaurants because they both wanted the same thing, but neither would order a whole one alone. 42 years of a love that never needed to announce itself. They deserve something real, something permanent. I'm a structural engineer. I've been working since I was 19, first part-time through college, then full-time the day after graduation. I don't say that to brag. I say it because you need to understand that the money I used was mine, every dollar of it. Saved over 12 years, moved carefully, invested quietly. I didn't inherit it. Nobody gave it to me. 18 months ago, I bought a piece of land about 40 minutes outside the city. 4,700 square feet on a small lake. Not a grand lake. Not the kind you see on postcards, but the kind where the light comes in low in the evening and the water goes very still, and you feel like the world has forgotten to be loud for a minute. My parents had always talked about a place like that. My mom would clip photos from magazines when I was little. A porch. A dock. Somewhere to watch the seasons change. I hired a contractor I trusted. I drove out every Saturday for 14 months. I picked the cabinet hardware. I picked the stone for the fireplace. I stocked the pantry with the exact brand of oatmeal my dad has eaten every morning for 30 years. Total cost, $287,000. I told my parents I was taking them somewhere for their anniversary. A nice dinner, I said. Dress comfortably. We pulled up to the house just before sunset. My mom looked at the front porch and then at me and said, "Whose house is this?" And I said, "Yours." She put both hands over her mouth. My dad stood very still for a moment, the way he does when something is too large to respond to right away. Then he walked slowly up the front path, touched the door frame with 2 fingers, and didn't say anything for a long time. We spent 4 hours there that first evening. I showed them every room. My dad found the coffee maker I had programmed to start at 6:15. He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that surprised him. My mom stood on the back porch and looked at the water and said, "I don't know how you did this." I said, "I just started and kept going." I had set the property up in an irrevocable trust with both of my parents as lifetime beneficiaries. The structure was simple. They could live there for the rest of their lives, fully protected. The property could not be sold without conditions I had specifically written in. I had also prepaid the property taxes for 15 years through a separate account tied to the trust. I had done this deliberately, carefully with an estate attorney I had paid out of pocket. I want to be clear about why I mentioned the legal setup this early in the story. I'm telling you now because it matters later. And because I want you to understand that I had thought about this. Not because I distrusted my parents. I trusted them completely. But I knew my sister. And more specifically, I knew her husband. My sister is 3 years older than me. She's not a bad person. That's something I've had to sit with for a long time because it would be easier if she were simply a villain. She isn't. She's someone who married a man who made her smaller over time and who she now defends with a loyalty that has cost her every close relationship she used to have, including, for long stretches, me, her husband. I will just call him what my dad privately called him for years, a schemer. Not in a dramatic way. In the specific, grinding way of someone who is always quietly calculating what belongs to them before anyone else has finished speaking. He had tried things before. Small things. Suggested to my parents that their car needed to go through him for any repairs because he knew a guy. Offered to help them with their taxes one year and then made a point of telling them in front of the extended family what their assets were worth. He once asked my dad, very casually, whether he'd thought about what would happen to the house after. My dad had changed the subject. So yes, I had done the legal setup for a reason. What I hadn't expected was that my brother-in-law would move quite this fast. When I pulled into the driveway and saw his truck, I didn't panic. I sat with the feeling for a moment. Identified it. It wasn't panic. It was something more like a clarity that had been waiting to arrive. I picked up my bag from the passenger seat. I had brought documents. I bring documents to things involving him. It's a habit I developed years ago after he once told my parents that I had verbally agreed to something I had absolutely not agreed to, with a confidence that almost made me doubt my own memory. Almost. I walked in through the front door, which was unlocked. My parents were in the living room. My mom was sitting very straight on the couch in the way she sits when she is uncomfortable, but trying not to show it. My dad was standing near the window with his hands in his pockets, and when he saw me, his face did something I can only describe as relief, mixed with an apology. My brother-in-law was at the kitchen table with his laptop open. My sister was on the back porch. I could see her through the glass doors, not quite looking in. He looked up when I walked in. He didn't seem surprised to see me, which told me he had known I was coming today and had timed this. "Hey," he said, like we'd run into each other at a grocery store. "Hey," I said. I put my bag down on the armchair. I did not sit. I find that when I remain standing in rooms where someone is trying to establish control, it changes the geometry of the conversation in a way that matters. "We were just going over some things," he said. "What things?" He tilted the laptop slightly toward me. He had pulled up a rental listing site. There was a property on the screen, a lakefront property. I looked at the photos. I recognized the back porch light fixture I had chosen. I recognized the stone on the fireplace. He had listed the house for rent, not listed it to list it. The listing was live, $30,400 a month. Availability starting in 6 weeks. He had done this. He had come to my parents' house, a house he had no legal connection to, and had sat down with his laptop and had listed it for rent on the internet. I stood there for exactly as long as it took me to understand the full shape of what I was looking at. Then I looked at my dad. My dad looked at me. His jaw was tight. He said, "Since the property is in our names," my dad said quietly, "it's a family asset." My brother-in-law nodded, confirming this version as though my dad had simply summarized a legal seminar rather than described an act of manipulation. "We're family," he said, looking at me now with the particular expression he gets when he's explaining something to someone he thinks is emotional. "The property is in your parents' names. That means it's part of the family estate. We're all stakeholders here." I said nothing for a moment. He took my silence as an opening. "I've already been in touch with the property manager," he said. "Rental income could cover the taxes, plus give your parents a monthly income. I've done the math. It makes sense." "You've been in touch with a property manager," I repeated. "It's a solid asset. It shouldn't just sit there." I looked over at my mom. She was looking at her hands. "Did either of you ask them to do this?" I asked. My mom shook her head almost imperceptibly. My dad said, "No." My brother-in-law made a small sound. Not quite a laugh, but adjacent to one. The kind that men like him make when a woman asks a question he thinks he's already answered. "Look," he said, "you did a nice thing. Really. But the way it's structured, with the property in their names, this is a family decision now. We all have a voice." I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said, "let me get something." I unzipped my bag. What it took out was a document folder, the kind with the elastic band around it, the kind that looks boring and important at the same time. I put it on the kitchen table and opened it. He looked at it the way people look at something they're not sure they should be worried about yet. I took out the trust document first. 22 pages, notarized, executed 14 months ago. I placed it on the table in front of him. "This property is held in an irrevocable trust," I said. "I am the grantor. My parents are the sole lifetime beneficiaries. The trust has specific provisions." I turned to the relevant page. "Nobody can sell this property. Nobody can rent this property. Nobody can encumber, transfer, or list this property for any commercial purpose. Not my parents. Not me. Not anyone who is not named as trustee, which is a trust company I selected specifically because they have no personal connection to this family." He looked at the document. "The rental listing you've created," I said, "constitutes unauthorized commercial use of a trust-held asset. The trust company has already been notified. I emailed them from the car." I took out a second document. "This is their acknowledgement, time-stamped about 11 minutes ago." He said nothing. "If the listing isn't removed in the next 24 hours, I said, "the trust company will pursue it as a legal matter. Their name is on the trust documentation. They take this very seriously." He stared at the table. I took out one more document. "This is the property tax schedule, 15 years of taxes are prepaid through a separate account. My parents don't owe anything on this property. There is no financial burden. There is no reason for a rental income strategy. There is no decision to be made by the family. I paused. There is no family stake in this property. None. My sister had come in from the back porch at some point. I don't know exactly when. She was standing near the glass door. She looked at her husband. He was still looking at the table. "You should take the listing down tonight," I said. "Not tomorrow." He closed the laptop. He didn't say anything else for a while. Then he picked it up and stood up from the table and said something to my sister in a low voice and walked toward the front door. My sister looked at me for a long moment, and then she followed him out. I heard the truck start. I heard it back out of the driveway. My mom exhaled. My dad was still standing by the window. He turned around slowly and looked at me with an expression I didn't have a word for then, and still don't entirely, except to say it was something in the neighborhood of profound. "You knew," he said. "I hoped I was wrong," I said. He nodded once. We didn't talk about it much after that. We made dinner. My mom had found the pasta I had stocked in the pantry, and she made the sauce she always makes, the one with the bay leaves she fishes out one by one before serving. My dad opened the bottle of wine I had left in the rack that I knew he'd been saving occasion for. We sat at the table and ate. At some point, my dad got up and walked out onto the back dock. I watched him through the window. He stood at the railing and looked at the water in the dark, and then he looked up at whatever stars were visible, and he stayed there for a long time without going anywhere. I washed the dishes. My mom came and stood beside me and didn't say anything and then said, "You planned all of this?" "Yes," I said. "Even the trust thing. You planned that before he ever came here?" "Yes." She was quiet. "Did you think he would?" she asked. I thought about the right way to answer that. I thought someone might. I didn't know it would happen this fast. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. In the weeks after, my brother-in-law took the listing down within the hour. I know because the trust company confirmed it the next morning. He has not been back to the property. My sister called me about 10 days later. The conversation was not warm, but it was honest. The most honest we've been with each other in years. I'm not sure what that becomes yet. I'm letting it breathe. My parents are there now, most weekends. My mom started a container garden on the porch. My dad has a particular chair on the dock where he sits with his coffee in the morning and watches the light shift across the water. He called me last Sunday. He said, "It's very quiet here." I didn't know I needed quiet. I've thought a lot about why I set things up the way I did, and it wasn't because I distrusted my parents. I want to be clear about that. It was because I knew that people who have spent 42 years being gentle with everyone, including people who don't deserve it, sometimes need someone to be practical on their behalf. Not a wall, just a structure that holds. I built them something I couldn't give them when I was little. A place where the world has to slow down, where nobody can come in and tell them what they own, where my dad can stand at the railing at night and not have to be anywhere else in the world. That was the whole point. That was always the whole point. I've thought about that evening a lot since then. Not the confrontation part, not the moment I put the documents on the table. I've thought about the hour after when my mom was fishing bay leaves out of the pasta sauce and my dad was opening the wine. And it was just the three of us in that kitchen like it had always been. Like the day had decided to be ordinary again. There's something I've come to believe about the way things unfold. And it has nothing to do with luck or timing or who happens to be in the right place. It has to do with preparation, meeting character. My brother-in-law walked into that house expecting to find people who would be confused, who would feel caught off guard, who would default to keeping the peace because that's what gentle people do. He had done the math on my parents, correctly, in a way. They are gentle. They would have tried to smooth it over. They would have said, "Let's talk about this later," and later would have stretched into something he could work with. What he hadn't done the math on was me. And I don't say that with pride exactly. I say it because I think there's something real in the idea that the preparation you do in private, the quiet, unglamorous work of thinking something through, of asking a lawyer the uncomfortable questions, of paying the fees and signing the documents when nothing bad has happened yet. That preparation is a form of care. It is how you love people who are too good at absorbing harm to protect themselves from it. I started saving money at 19 because I had a goal I couldn't fully name yet. I worked Saturdays for 14 months on a construction site because I wanted something to be real. I sat with an estate attorney for 3 hours asking questions about scenarios I hoped would never happen. None of that felt heroic at the time. It felt like homework. It felt like being boring, in the specific way that responsible people are boring before something goes wrong. But that's the thing about integrity. It doesn't show up when things are going well. It shows up in the decisions you made 6 months ago, 2 years ago, when you were tired and nobody was watching, and it would have been easier to skip the step. My brother-in-law is not a stupid man. He is a calculating man. The difference is that calculation without integrity is just cleverness aimed in the wrong direction, and eventually it runs into something it didn't account for. What I want, and I mean this, I've turned it over many times, is not for him to have been punished. I don't feel satisfaction about the look on his face. What I feel is something quieter than that. I feel the thing you feel when you realize that doing the right thing, slowly and privately and without anyone watching, actually held. The structure held. My parents are safe. My dad called me last Sunday. He said the fog had come in low over the water and it was the most peaceful thing he'd ever seen from a porch. He said it like he was reporting something important. Like he wanted me to know that the quiet was real. I built something for them. And I protected it. And now he sits in a chair in the morning with his coffee and watches the light change and doesn't have to be anywhere else. That was always the whole point. And it turns out the whole point was enough.